Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I can't see you, but I sense there's a wonderful crowd out there, which is there you are. All right, look at all those smiling faces. Welcome to the Donna Morris Theater in the Field Arts and Events Hall on the Port Angeles Waterfront campus. Before we go any further, as we always do, on behalf of our board and staff, I would like to acknowledge that the ground we are on is the traditional land of the Klallam or Sklallam Strong people, and they have stewarded this land for thousands of years, and we are using it currently. Thank you. My name is Brooke Taylor. I'm wearing two hats tonight. I'm the president of the board of directors of the Field Arts and Events Hall, have been for the last 9 years now, and we are delighted to have you here in this beautiful space. But I'm also here as a 56-year member of the Port Angeles Kiwanis Club, also known as the Noon Club. And the relevance of that is that John Brier was also a longtime and much beloved member of the Port Angeles Kiwanis Club. Within a matter of days after John's untimely passing last spring, our club members were trying to figure out how we could support and sponsor and contribute to something that would pay tribute to his legacy in this community. And I think we came up with a home run, judging from the people that are here tonight. This is a very, very timely subject for people in the journalism business and for all of us who rely on them so much. I do want to make one program note that our executive director asked me to remind you of, and that is that this is being live streamed, and it will also be rebroadcasted on the Port Angeles Public Broadcasting. So it can be seen later for anybody who maybe missed it tonight or would like to see it again. I want to tell you just one quick story about John Brier, which I think is very, very relevant to the topic you're going to hear about tonight from our esteemed panel. When this project first started 9 years ago in 2016, our board of directors, which was then 7 people, decided that one of the first things we needed to do in doing our homework was to find out from community leaders what this community wanted, needed, and would support in the way of a building to surround our Performing Arts Center. The core mission was to build this theater, but we knew to make it work, we had to add other facets to it. So I immediately thought of my dear friend John Brier, because he knew everybody in the community and he knew it inside and out, and I knew he would shoot straight with me like he always did. So we had a delightful lunch together. I laid out all of the details of what this project was to date. We had a bunch of money, and we had a lady's dream, and we had a beautiful piece of ground on the waterfront. And after I'd laid all of that out to John and we had a nice discussion, he said, look, let me tell you something. My wife and I will support this project. We love the performing arts. We think it's a great idea. But, so here comes the but. If you want to get the strong support of the business community in Klallam County, you need to see if you can combine that theater with a dedicated conference and event space. And he was adamant about that. He said, we've needed it for decades. We've missed out on opportunity after opportunity because we haven't had the appropriate facility. So I knew that was the case, but coming from me, nobody would pay any attention to it. When I told my board that came from John Brier, everybody paid attention, even Dorothy Field, who was convinced all we needed was a theater. And he was so right. And just to that point, coming up at the end of May, we have a 200-member statewide conference coming to our conference center that's going to fill up the Red Lion every room for 3 nights. And that, the idea for having that facility came from our own John Brier. Now I'm going to hand the mic off to our other sponsor, who is the sustaining sponsor of all community conversations. When we were at a point where we needed to restart rebuilding after the COVID pause, we were short of money because of cost increases. Our own community bank, First Federal, stepped forward, and they stepped forward in a big way. And one of the things they did was provide a very large cash donation to our construction fund. But instead of wanting to get their name on this building, they said, no, what we want to do is just be allowed to be the sustaining sponsor of a series of community conversations, just like the one we're having tonight. And I give them a tremendous amount of credit for doing that, and they will continue to do it going into the future. So with that, I would like to introduce to you the CEO of the bank that puts the C in Community Bank, Mr. Matt Dines.
Good evening. What a great crowd. And Brooke, thank you for the introduction. Being here and being a part of the community conversations at Field Hall is really what we're all about. We want to have this sense of community in everything that we do. And I'm so grateful to all of you for coming here tonight for a very important panel to talk about a very important topic in the importance of local journalism. Just like we think it is paramount to have strong community banks in every community in our country, every community in our state, it's important for us to have local journalists who can help us, especially during these trying times, to really get to the root of what's going on. I think we all wake up every morning and look at the news and say, what is going on? And we need our local journalists to tell us what is happening in our local community. We have representatives from radio and journalism. We have representatives from the Seattle Times, former editor of the Puget Sound Business Journal, and our local sound publishing managing director here as well. And I think it's so important that we have all forms of journalism and news available to us every day so that we know what's going on in our community, so that we can be involved, so that we can be engaged, and we can try to make an impact to make a positive change every day. So George is going to introduce the panel, but I'm going to start by making an introduction for George Erb. He is a retired journalist and university educator who remains active in journalism and open government issues. He worked more than 40 years as a reporter and editor at weekly and daily newspapers, all in Western Washington. His writing credits include the Seattle Times and the Peninsula Daily News. For 7.5 years, he served as the editor of the Puget Sound Business Journal, and the Business Weekly was a runner-up for a Pulitzer Prize. For nearly 10 years, George was an adjunct journalism instructor at Western Washington University. George is currently the secretary of the Washington Coalition for Open Government, a nonpartisan, nonprofit advocate for transparency and informed citizens. He lives in Bellevue with his wife, historical nonfiction author Mavis Edmondson. Please help me to introduce George and the rest of the panel.
Come on out. I was worried there where my companions were. Matt, first of all, thank you for that gracious introduction. And I'm just tickled, actually, to be in this facility during my time at the Peninsula Daily News. This was a log yard. And it was highly controversial for decades. And so I'm astonished in the best possible way that this is what eventually became the use of this property. I mean, what an incredible facility. As journalists, we don't always get to see how the story ends, but this time we get to see it. So we're all here, of course, because of John Brier. And I just want to kind of give you some personal reminiscences of John. Some of you may not know this, but when he was a kid, he actually started his own newspaper, covered the news of the neighborhood, He went to college at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo. And naturally, he worked for the student newspaper. I know that he said at least once he was called in to see the dean because of his coverage. Fast forward again, like a few years more. In 1969, he was a cub reporter for the Associated Press in Los Angeles. And he was brand new there. And in the summer of '69, it was a weekend in August, his editor told him to go out to, I think it's pronounced Cielo Drive in Los Angeles, to look into some police activity that was taking place down there. It was early in the morning, it was on a weekend, so he went down there. And as it turned out, John Brier ended up being one of the first, maybe the first, newsmen on the scene of the Sharon Tate homicides. Actress Sharon Tate died that day along with 4 of her friends, and it turned out to be one in a series of murders that were carried out by Charles Manson and the Manson family. A few years beyond that, by 1980, John Brier is the bureau chief at the Associated Press in Seattle. In May of that year, Mount St. Helens exploded. The Seattle Bureau spent weeks chasing stories and providing copy and photographs to editors literally all over the world. It was pandemonium. John Brier was there for that. He eventually went on to become the bureau chief of the Associated Press in Los Angeles. He went from there to the New York Times, where he was in New York. He was the head of the New York Times News Service. And then he came back out here to Port Angeles. I know that he cared deeply about this community, and he really embedded himself in this place. And you know what? That was pretty typical that he would do that. But I know that he really cared about this place, and he became active in so many areas. He raised money, for murals downtown and the Peninsula Home Fund. And he was active in organizations like the Friends of Ennis Creek and the Port Angeles Business Association, and I'm sure I'm leaving out a ton of others. But the point is that he really cared about this place. And so, in summary, I know that I needed to kind of sum this part up, and I thought about it, and I was originally going to say that the news found John Brier, and he ran toward it. But after I thought about it a little while, I realized, no, it's actually broader than that. The news finds all of us. The news finds all of us, and we need it because the news is essential to society's ability to search for truth. And without truth, it's very difficult for communities to move forward. And that's why journalism and the media is so important. So, that's what brings us full circle to this panel about why we're here. So what we're going to talk about tonight, we're going to talk about local news. We're going to talk about where local news is now, both in general and here in Port Angeles. We're going to talk about why it matters, and we're going to talk about some paths going forward, hopefully that we can find ourselves in a better place. And I'm speaking for all of you here, which is always dangerous, but I think I'm safe to say that we all hope that this is not an end point, that this is rather a beginning, and that the conversation continues in this community. And I know that this community is definitely up for that. We're going to have time at the end of the panel for Q&A, just kind of like a heads up on how the Q&A will work. We'll save time at the very end, hopefully 15, 20 minutes, and we'll take questions from the audience out here. We'll have a couple microphones out here, and we're also taking questions from people online because this event is being live streamed, and I've got a companion here who's going to be texting me the questions that come in online. So say, George, if you're not looking at your phone in Q&A, look at your phone, George. There might be some questions there. Help me out on that. And then if we don't get to all of the questions in the Q&A, be assured you can come up to the stage afterwards. We're happy to talk to you on one-on-one, and there's also going to be a gathering upstairs, afterwards. So there'll be lots of time, for you to get to us and ask questions and have conversations if we run out of time during the Q&A. So with that, let me introduce my panelists up here. I got to get my readers on so I can see. First of all, to my right is Brier Dudley. Brier is the editor of the Save the Free Press initiative at the Seattle Times, where he's worked for many years as a reporter, a columnist. He's been a member of the editorial board, and he's been at the Times for a long time. He was also at the Yakima Herald Republic, and he got his start at the Sequim Gazette. Sitting to my right is Eran Kennedy. Eran is the regional publisher of the Peninsula Daily News, the Sequim Gazette, the Forks Forum, and many other papers. Her media career spans nearly 40 years, and one of her stops in her career was in Hawaii, for which I am eternally jealous. On my left is Brown Maloney. Brown is the owner-operator of Radio Pacific, which has 3 radio stations in this market. Brown has extensive experience in the media. He's a radio guy now. He has been a newspaper guy in the past. He used to own the Sequim Gazette and the Forks Forum, and he has been active on a much larger stage in the newspaper business as a member of the McClatchy family. And he's been on the board of the Seattle Times, so Brown has a very high-level view of the media. Please welcome Emma Maple for my far right. She has a fan base, I see. Emma is a reporter at the Peninsula Daily News. She's a recent graduate of Whitworth University, and I'm glad that she's on this panel because she represents the latest generation of journalists, and that's important. Right on. Yes. And then here on my right, old friend of mine, we go back a long time, Rich Riski. He's a longtime instructor of journalism at Peninsula College, as well as a working reporter and photographer. He worked for the Peninsula Daily News and KOMP Radio, and he's also documented several presidential campaigns. So please welcome to Rich. So let's jump in. I've given you the outline so you know where we are and where we're going and where we're going to end up. But let's just start with like a big picture question. Any one of you can take it, and that's basically, what's the state of local news in general?
Well, can you hear me? Is this working? Local, regional, national as well. It really is all in the same pot. It was 15 years ago in 2010, I was asked to give a presentation in Sequim on the state of the media business, which then was trending downwards and having a very difficult time. And so that was 15 years ago, so make no mistake, we are well into our second decade of a seismic disruption in the journalism industry. And since I was thinking about this last couple of days, since I like music, I wondered if I could find a song title that summarizes the current state of newspapers and the overall journalism industry. I say that because music is so full of stories and songs and sometimes even the titles. Well, I started with the Rolling Stones as they have multiple titles, and as well, I like them. So what did I find? Things that might apply, but I kept saying no, no, no. Yes, there's titles like, I Can't Get No Satisfaction, You Can't Always Get What You Want, 19th Nervous Breakdown. But none of those just really summed up what I was looking for until I saw it. 2 words. That song by the Rolling Stones, Gimme Shelter. So let me say, a guy named Craig took all our advertising, while the likes of Google and Facebook has taken our dollars and left us with pennies. All this to create social media, which has taken eyeballs from us and created a cyclical shift of millions of hours of time each day into another kind of reading. There are more dynamics as well. But it can't be ignored, throwing salt in these wounds of ours, of the trusted news organizations, is our very own president wanting to discredit honest journalism that no crystal ball ever in the past might have predicted. Understand, I'm not trying to be fatalistic at all, but in this day and age, we're all adults in this room here, big boys and big girls, and we have to understand that journalism does have a fight on its hands. Good, honest, local journalism that I call trusted voices that have always brought to communities just what they need to hear with accuracy, precision, and on a regular basis. And again, that's not pretty, but it is where we're at today.
Great job with that. Brier, I think you had a couple points that you wanted to talk about there.
Oh, sure. Thank you very much for having me here. It's really these are my journalism educators, by the way. I was an English major at Whitman, and my journalism education came from competing with George and working for Brown and hearing from people in Clallam County telling me where I needed to improve. So I'm glad to be back here. I've got a weird job right now at the Seattle Times. We started a public service initiative about 4 years ago to raise awareness of the local journalism crisis. And I think I'm the only person at a newspaper in the country who writes about this full time. So I can talk about this till everybody is asleep in the room. But as far as the state that we're in right now, the decline really started around the 1999, 2000 or so with the .com explosion. We've since then lost a third of the local newspapers in the United States. We've lost about, we're down to about 5,600 local newspapers left. Washington State has about 110, 120 local newspapers, but that masks the bigger decline, which is within the newsrooms themselves. So even you might have titles that are still there, but because the industry has contracted so much and lost so much of its traditional revenue, that the number of reporters and photographers and editors in those newsrooms is down by about 70%. That's the case in Washington State, that's the case nationally. I'm pretty my bias is towards print media, but this also affects local broadcasters as well, nonprofits, online only. Newspapers continue, though, to be the primary source of local news. They produce most of the local news in a community, even if there's TV and radio and things like that. So a lot of the conversation is around local newspapers. We're not completely dead, though, even though those are very depressing numbers. A lot of newspapers and a lot of local media organizations have found ways to stabilize in the last few years. We're pretty much through the transition to, even though I say newspaper, just about every newspaper is really an online business that also may print a newspaper as well. The ones that are still around have stabilized, found ways to continue. The problem is they're so much smaller and there's so much less competition, and independent, small, family-owned newspapers in small communities and rural areas particularly, they're not quite through that transition and they're continuing to fail. We're losing 2.5 newspapers a week on average across the United States, and of course it just keeps going and going, and pretty soon we're down to nothing. There's reams of academic research on what that means for America and for democracy. There's a great book called News Hole that came out a year or two ago, if you're interested. They did it was by academics on the East Coast, and they did some research that found in places that have lost local newspapers and local news, 60% of the people don't know who their mayor is. 80% of the people, only 16% of the people know who their local school superintendent is. Now, when I saw you all, I think you probably are the kind of people who do know those kind of things. But what's really scary, because these are voters who are deciding how we are going to run our communities. Most of the things we vote on, most of the time we need to be civically engaged is local. Of course, we talk about Trump and Biden and blah, blah, blah a lot, but really when you vote, it's local issues. And it's a little scary to think that, the majority of people in thousands of communities that have no local news don't even know who their mayor is, and they're the ones deciding who ought to represent them going forward. So I'll stop right now. I can keep going, but it's definitely something that we need to address.
Well, and I think what I can add to that is that, with the advent of big tech and Google, there's many places, many sources where you can gather your news. But I do think what's happening is that there are a finite number of trained journalists these days that are creating original content. So we are the originators of content, and what happens is our content is then echoed on throughout the internet. And so I think that has definitely been a challenge, and I know that we'll speak to that in a few minutes.
Yeah. I've several friends, and actually the only friends I have are in the audience, okay? John Kendall, Jay Klein, Cheryl Crane. Oh, that's right, Cheryl Bauman, that's right. Okay, so one of the things I would say, and John Kendall mentioned this earlier, about, don't go over glory days. But one of the glory days things I got to bring up here is when I worked at the Peninsula Daily News many years ago, when we walked in, it was like a noisy place. I mean, there were probably 12 to 15 people in the newsroom all the time, as well as the people, selling classified advertising and all that stuff. And now it's just scaled down significantly. It's really small. And that's really unfortunate. The other thing is, even though it may not be popular to say, we went through this thing with Twig Smith and all these others when the consolidation and that stuff. But the issue of having one company own multiple papers, it would be really healthy if the Forks Forum was owned by one major family. I'll just say a major family. It would be another if the Sequim Gazette was owned by another company, and the Peninsula Daily News was, of course, owned by Carpenter Media Sound Publishing. But there is a great synergy to having different companies competing against each other in a small area. The variety of stories cannot be diminished. You have much more stories, you have a greater variety of stories, you have a greater depth of stories on sometimes the same topic. So I look at that and I say, that's what we need. So I would just like these things to scale up in a large respect. I also want to bring up, and I have to do this because of a variety of reasons, but I'm not getting paid to say it, so just so you know. I really do think the Port Townsend Leader does a really good job. If people go over to Port Townsend and get it, they did a Sunshine Week, the responsibilities to come with the Fourth Estate, that was really outstanding. And I've never met, Lloyd Mullen. Who? Lloyd Mullen. Oh yeah, Lloyd Mullen. Yeah, I've never met Lloyd either. But I never met Meredith Jordan, and Meredith Jordan is doing a really good job over in Port Townsend.
Is someone waving their hand there? Is that you, Meredith?
Oh yeah, please do. I didn't know you were here. Yeah, good. So I think the Sunshine Week was a really positive thing, really powerful. It helps explain journalism, because sometimes journalism is seen as this, opaque thing. And I don't think it should be opaque. I don't think it really is, et cetera. So I just think the Port Townsend Leader does a great job, and I've seen a lot of good material there that's both certainly investigative, but also, institutional stuff and feature stuff and all that. I think the radio stations are really strong. Yes, I used to work at one of the radio stations, but I did work there actually before Brown bought one of them. I don't know, you buy a bunch of stuff. But anyways.
After you left, I wanted to buy it.
All right, yeah, nice. Well played. So they actually, I'm saying this was a long time ago, but they actually put together a small newspaper called Peninsula People. And so I was able to do the small publication right beside, literally, 100 feet away from the Peninsula Daily News where it's located now. So it was really fun to do this little paper. Todd Ortloff helped put it together, and then walk across the street and talk with them about what stories we had versus they had. So that kind of thing was just fun. It was not competition, really. It was great, and that was positive. So I just hope that all the employees get scaled up at every one of these publications.
Welcome to
okay.
Beacon.
Okay, got it.
So, less competition, fewer journalists, fewer newspapers. I think it's safe to say that newspapers are probably on the leading edge of the losses. Is that what you're saying, Brier? Yeah. So that's where we are on the national level. Let's zoom in locally. now. What's the state of local news in Clallam County? Who wants to go for that one?
Well, one thing I want to say is, while Rich, you're right, it's always great to look in the rearview mirror and talk about what I call the go-go days. And just the energy, beating someone to a story. And people will say, oh, newspapers, oh, the Daily News isn't what it used to be. The Seattle Times isn't what it used to be. The Sacramento Bee, the newspaper that my great-great-grandfather, isn't what it used to be. And to that I will say, they are not, and it saddens me. But keep in mind the passion and the mission and what the people behind these newspapers want to do and cover and how they want to serve their communities. The Daily News may not have 15 people in their newsroom anymore. They do have less of a budget. I mean, that's just because it's the way it is everywhere. But please understand, they're doing the best they can. And they also need to hear from you. News ideas, little tips. Those things still get listened to, and there still are people there that will pick up the phone and talk to you. And they don't have the staff they used to, but newspapers locally, and I think most places, and the media are really trying. At KONP, when I bought the radio station, I bought it because largely it was a news station. It was an ABC affiliate. That appealed to me. It wasn't a music station. Not that that was bad, but the fact that it was a news station had meant a lot to me. So I'm very passionate about the mission of journalism. That hasn't changed, but it also has changed. So please, anyone else?
Great. I think that's for me, right? Do you have a question for me that you wanted to ask?
You have a question you want to answer.
Okay, go ahead.
Go for it.
Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a little history lesson, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a how and a little bit of why we are where we are today. If I look in I know others here have talked a little bit about the distant past. I'm going to just take us right from kind of just pre-COVID-19 to where we are today, because talk about seismic changes that have been happening in the local media, that's when I look to some really key things that have happened. So number one, during COVID, what happened? Many of our stakeholders retracted. They had to put food on the table. They wanted to keep jobs in their own local businesses. And so they retracted their advertising, and they either reduced advertising, or some of them found other venues to advertise. And I think that they did what they could. And during that time, we also offered grants to the community to try and help spur and stimulate the economy during COVID. There also became a really difficult challenge in our circulation. I'm sure there's many of you here in the audience that called our newspaper, and my goodness, we had a tough time during COVID getting the newspaper out every day with our adult carrier system. And so we did something really smart during that moment. And the good news there is that we really focused on our customer service. I know that there were days, and certainly as I look around the room tonight, there are people that I was in the car with as we were delivering newspapers to your local home. So we made sure. So COVID-19 happened, a retraction of advertising. We had a challenge there with our circulation. And then from there, just directly post-COVID, I looked to David Black, who owned Sound Publishing, Black Press Media, and he retired, and his family said, okay, we're going to sell the business. And boom, he ran out of runway to facilitate the debt that Black Press had incurred. So what that meant is that we, Black Press Media, declared Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection at that time. So not a big change for us from a day-to-day business here locally on the peninsula, but certainly a challenge in wondering who would be the next owner of Sound Publishing, Peninsula Daily News, Queen Gazette, Forks Forum, and our 42 other papers that we have here locally in Western Washington. And lo and behold, that's when Carpenter Media came on the scene and secured the Peninsula Daily News and Sound Publishing and so on and so forth. And so from there, I would say that we have gone through an intense kind of year and a half of restructuring our debts. And with that, that means restructuring our expenses because we don't have the advertising to support it. So then if I think through, okay, so that is sort of the worst of the worst, the kind of bad news. But the good news is with Carpenter Media and the changes that we have made, we have done a few things that I'd just like to kind of share, which are that we have diversified our revenues. And so you might know that the Peninsula Daily News has the largest trafficked website on the Olympic Peninsula, anywhere between 800,000 and 1.2 million page views a month. So we have monetized some advertising on our websites. And then I look to the fact that we have provided digital solutions to digital advertising solutions, that is, that are outside of our websites to many local area businesses. So I think that that has helped a great deal, because I think I've heard, oh, your paper's thinner, how are you doing it? How are you paying the bills every month? Well, we've diversified that revenue. We have aligned our expenses with our revenue. But then looking forward, we continue to focus on our customer service so that we're actually answering the phones and continuing to embed ourselves in the community. On the reporting side, some other shifts have happened, and that is, as you might know, there is a voracious appetite for local news, and that in part kind of spurred the increase in our traffic on our websites. And so I think that with that we have kind of continued to sort of prosper there. So, you know, those are just some thoughts there on where we are, how we got here, and where we're going. And you know, let's talk some more. What else you got up your sleeve there?
Looks like Brier's got some thoughts.
Well, I'd kind of like to hear from the reporter. You know, it's so scary. You know, why did you choose to come here, and why did you choose to do this? And what's your perspective?
And let me just say something about Emma. She's a firecracker, and she's in journalism because she wants to be in journalism. I talked to her about college and why she chose this, and she's passionate about it. And she, well, please, Emma.
Go,
All
Emma.
right. Well, a little bit like John Brier, actually, I have always loved journalism. I also started a newspaper when I was young called the Maple News. My last name is Maple, so it wasn't very creative. But the reason why I decided to stay in journalism, and I'll go through a little bit of a sideways explanation for this. I was a philosophy minor in college, and my philosophy friends would always sit me down and give me all these thought experiments. The easiest one that everybody always thinks of is the trolley problem. And I was always a little upset with the thought experiments because I said, these are extreme situations which no person's ever going to be put in. Why are we even talking about this? And that's a little bit my viewpoint still, but thought experiments are important because they kind of show you what values are important when you take things to the extreme. And that's actually why I am a journalist. So I grew up in what someone might call a thought experiment, not intentionally, but I grew up in a very insular environment for religious reasons. Information was severely restricted. We didn't have Wi-Fi for all of my life. We used encyclopedias from the 1980s to do our school assignments. We were homeschooled, of course. So information and my access to it was severely, severely restricted. And that hurt the ability for it to form a healthy community in my family. Just for an example of how severely restricted information was, I didn't know the 2020 government shutdown happened until after it was over. And I also, well, another reason information is super important is not just to form healthy communities, but also to challenge ideas. And another example of that is I, as a child, was never presented with the viewpoint, the alternative viewpoint that Obama was actually an American citizen, because my family was convinced that he wasn't. So, going from that environment into college and joining the school newspaper really forced me to sit down and think about what can form communities. And I truly believe that a healthy community cannot form unless there is sharing of information and the challenging of ideas. And so I decided to become a journalist because I think that's the best way to go about it.
Wow, way to go, Emma. What a great story. Good job.
Good job.
So, Brier, even though Seattle's a big market, at the end of the day, it's an important market. It's served by one newspaper over there. Is it okay, George, if I asked Brier a question? And it serves the state. It really is a statewide newspaper. And let me say something, too, about the Seattle Times. It's been locally owned now. It's in its fifth generation. It's been locally owned for roughly 120 years, I think. The Blethen family, and Frank Blethen has been the publisher there for, I would say, close to 30 years. And that man is passionate about covering his community and the mission of what newspapers still are. And whatever it takes, he is going to give the community and the state the best damn newspaper they can. And I want you to realize that Seattle has one of the best newspapers that's in a metro market in the country. So, and that is true. So, Brier?
Wow. Well, thank you, Brown. Yeah, Washington State is actually really lucky in that the major dailies that we still have are family-owned and independent, which is unusual. I mean, no shade toward Carpenter, Port Angeles, but the newspaper in Spokane and the newspaper in Vancouver and the newspaper in Seattle are all owned by families, multiple generation families, although Spokane just announced that they're going to give the paper away to a local nonprofit, which is very interesting. Seattle Times is doing pretty well. We have about 175 people in our newsroom. That's by far the largest newsroom. I mean, it's probably more than all the other newspapers combined. But I got to say, I've been there about 26 years, and when I started, there were 450 people at the Seattle Times. So, we have adjusted. I'm glad the family stuck with it. They've sold off all their property to keep pouring it back into the paper and reinvest in online presence and new advertising systems and things like that. And we're actually hiring and growing still. We've also, one thing that's real interesting that the guy who owns the paper, the family that owns the paper did was about 10, 12 years ago, they were the first paper to really experiment with what I call a hybrid model, where we supplemented the newsroom coverage with philanthropic money. There was, we were having kind of an education crisis, K through 12 education crisis in Washington State. We were strapped, and we turned to the Gates Foundation, and they were very concerned about the education situation as well. And they and some other philanthropists gave us money to hire a whole team, build up our education team. They had no say whatsoever. They still have no say whatsoever in what we cover, how we cover it, or anything like that. But that began what we call our labs. It began with our education lab, where they fund a special team to focus on solutions around education, things like that. That works so well, we created a traffic lab to address traffic issues. We have a homelessness lab, but we have a climate lab, and we have a mental health lab. Steve Ballmer and Connie Ballmer donated money for us to do deep dives on behavioral health challenges in Washington. And right now we have about 27, 30 of our reporters, newsroom staff are funded through these things. It worked so well that we went around the country and helped explain this to other newspapers, and most of the big newspapers, especially independent ones, have gone this route. New Orleans imitated our investigative journalism lab or fund that we have. It enabled them to grow their investigative team. It enabled us to increase our investigative team to about 8 people. Dallas, go around the country, all sorts of independent, for-profit newspapers are turning to this hybrid model because we lost most of our advertising revenue. We depend on subscriptions mostly now to fund our business. And for people to want to subscribe, you've got to have good content. And so there's a little bit of a catch-22 here. You've got to have good content to get good subscriptions. You've got to maintain kind of a critical mass of coverage or you're going to lose your local audience. And the big philanthropies locally, regionally, and nationally have all realized, hey, it's super important to have a newspaper. Even if you don't subscribe to it, it's kind of like having a hospital that's sort of operating in the background. It's providing the service. It's providing a baseline of information. It's holding local officials accountable. It's fighting for public meetings and public records and stuff like that. So there's a lot of community interest in making sure that we continue to have good, healthy, robust local news organizations. And that kind of like the Brier. Well, anyway, I'll stop.
I just wanted to kind of touch on Carpenter Media because I'm not sure that people know a lot about Carpenter Media and who they are and why they decided to buy Sound Publishing. And so they are actually a family business, Todd Carpenter, and they come out of the southeastern United States. And I think that they saw this news desert on the horizon, and they realized that local families, local newspaper families, were really struggling to continue in their way of life and how it was. And I think that they really stepped up to the plate to secure not only Sound Publishing, but groups of papers in Oregon. I believe if I get this right, I hope I do, that they have about 242 newspapers across America in 20 states, 2 provinces, and 2 territories in Canada. So they're pretty widespread, but I think one thing that kind of runs through the information that I receive, and certainly they're actually going to be coming up to spend a lot of time with me next week, and that is what runs through the conversation is to really focus on what matters most and to really keep our local newspapers exactly what they are, and to help us restructure so that we can get going into the future, and so that we not only survive but we thrive in the future. And so I really like this idea of this hybrid model, and I know we'll talk about that more in a few minutes.
So we've heard about why young people are still getting into journalism. It's inspiring. I saw it a lot at Western Washington University. It was really encouraging. We've heard about how the problem of local news, it's not just a newsroom problem, it's fundamentally a business problem, and about how the earth has literally shifted underneath the feet of these media companies, and about some of the things that they've had to do to respond. Different revenue streams, they're trying to be innovative, thinking out of the box, kind of rethinking, where the money comes from. So I hope you get a sense that there's actually a lot of action going on out there, and I'm grateful for Brier for keeping track of it, because it's a lot going on.
So one thing I want to say too, George, is you hear from our end of it, what we do and how we're trying to navigate through this, but really this is, there's play here on both sides. I mean, going forward, what can you do? Subscribe. And I think to some degree, kind of preaching to the choir, I think largely this is a pretty well-read group. Folks that are interested in their community, what is happening in the county we live in, whether it's Clallam, whether it's Jefferson. They're interested in what's happening in City Hall. But support and subscribe, and even encourage others to subscribe. because numbers do matter. And so on your part, thank you in advance, those of you that do subscribe to one or multiple newspapers in this room. And for those that don't, you know, please, we need you. It's really important that people that are elected officials know that if, and they will respond to the newspaper. If I started a blog in Seattle and I called City Hall and wanted to talk to the mayor, I would not get a call back. I can promise you, if someone from the Seattle Times called the mayor's office, they would get a call back. And so these are the institutions that need to be supported. Our legislature's in session right now. In fact, I think we're down to the last week. 20 years ago, the press pool in Olympia was 38 to 40 people. This year, right now, it's right at about 9. So that's such a reduction of people that are there for you, that are there asking questions and letting us all know. So please, moving forward, continue to subscribe, and please be one of our supporters just in conversation when you're at people's houses, out to dinner, and say, I subscribe because I want to. It's important.
Thanks for that. Let's go high concept for a moment. And we'll have to be brief about it. Let's be brief on this one, because I want to save time, because I know that there are some other things important things that you need to say, so I want to make sure we have enough time for that. But the high concept question is, it's a big one, is why does local news matter? What's the so what? Who wants to take that?
Oh, I'll take this. Local news isn't just a one-way street. We do not just provide the information, we verify that information, and then we amplify the message. And I think I did a count the other day when I looked around our team members, and I looked around and I know all of us on this panel do the same. We sit on a variety of boards of directors for local nonprofits. We volunteer. We sponsor and partner with every local festival and event. We help raise with the Peninsula Daily News Peninsula Home Fund $113,000 this year that will be redirected into the community. So yes, thank you. That's very exciting news for us, and we'll have some updates for you. Very shortly on May the 1st, we'll be putting together the grassroots event, the Clallam County Community Service Awards. And so I look at the people on my team who pick up a hammer or a shovel and they help build or fund the local dream playground. The person that is sitting beside you at a sporting event that's cheering their child on, the person that's scorekeeping your child's basketball game, or I was actually thinking baseball game. But what I want to say is that we are embedded in the community, and I would say that it's likely that the money comes into us through our subscriptions, which thankfully leveled off after COVID, and we've had an increase certainly in our digital subscriptions too. But I would say, look at the people that are making the impact in our community, the people that you stand in line up at the grocery store, and the jobs, because it's not like your money is going to go outside of the community. Your jobs, the jobs, and certainly any revenue that comes into the Peninsula Daily News goes right back and embeds in our community. And although it's kind of an indefinite number, I would roughly estimate it somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million every single year that the PDN is pumping back into the community to help it survive and thrive. And I know Brown, we were interviewed together by the Times of London before the political election last fall, because they wanted to ask us about why was Clallam County the bellwether. And I think our point, that's the bellwether for choosing the candidate on the same local level as the national level. And my perspective was that it's because we're an informed community, and this informed community really makes a difference. Take that.
So the other end of the scale, the young buck here, Emma, why is journalism important?
Okay, well, so at the PDN we have about three news journalists covering 2 counties and about 4 cities, even though we don't do a ton of coverage for Sequim or Forks because they have their own papers. But with that few journalists, each of us have to make a lot of value judgments, because the amount of stories in this community is insane and not anything that 3 people could cover on their own. So I think when I sit down to make a value judgment about why I cover what I do, there are 2 main reasons I believe journalism is important that affect the value as I'm looking at the story. The first one I would say is the ability for citizens to engage in their democracy and have correct information. With social media, that's something that can often be difficult if you rely on sources that haven't verified their information. So unfortunately, this looks like a lot of reporting on money, which is not my favorite thing in the world, but it is important. And I think the second value that I look at when I'm choosing a story to cover is amplifying voices that wouldn't be heard otherwise. Now, in today's world, pretty much anybody can get their voice out on social media in some way or another. But anyone who's familiar with free speech theory knows the idea of the megaphone effect, where certain platforms, certain people have the ability to project a voice farther than it could on its own. And I think that's a really important part of journalism, because, I mean, there's voices that need to be heard in our society, and if journalists don't exist to tell them, then they're just going to be forgotten.
Well said.
Okay. Because our time is running quickly, I'm just going to give a couple things. One is the greatest quote that I've ever had. It's not my quote, of course. The greatest quote that's created the most discussion and the most rancor and the most controversy and the most fulfilling arguments in any class, and I've taught a lot of classes in 20 plus years, yada, yada, yada. There's a person named Finley Peter Dunn who was a Chicago humorist, and he was either a contemporary of Theodore Roosevelt or Franklin Roosevelt. Yes, I recognize those are 2 different people. Not the point. The quote was, the role of the newspaper, and they said the newspaper, not the press, so I'm giving you exactly. The role of the newspaper is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. That is exactly what the press should always be doing. I don't care if it's radio or television or magazines, that's exactly what they have to do. So the obvious is the neediest people in society. You write about the homeless, you write about the destitute, you write about racism, you write about the patriarchy, the sexism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You write about immigration, you write about refugees, all that stuff. But you then hold the powerful accountable, which in our days, you know, I wouldn't call them robber barons, but of course we could go down that line and say, you know, who has the social media? Who owns the social media and what do they do with it? That to me is a major problem, because we don't have the same standards as certain things in European control and regulations and guardrails specific to social media. Because of social media, because of chatbots, you know, and because of that famous quote, we've got to flood the zone, that's exactly what's happened, and that's what a lot of youth use, et cetera, et cetera. So I just look at that and say, that's the major challenge of all the press. And by the press, again, I mean, it doesn't matter, press, radio, TV, et cetera. And it's always easier to view something or to listen to something, and I'm fine with multitasking when you're driving down the road, but that doesn't mean you should ever take photographs while the car is moving and you're driving the car. you know? So, okay. So that having been said, I have to say, there's this Canadian, you know, because I look at the time and I go, yeah, media literacy, and we're lucky our state's adopted media literacy. We have a supervisor who does media literacy and digital citizenship in the state of Washington. This person does a really fine job. They've got a lot of free resources. If you want to look at that, they're fantastic. National Public Radio has a lot of free resources. There's a newspaper and education program at almost every major metro newspaper. I require all of my students in certain classes, not all, but almost all, if any of you are here, you know, to have a required digital subscription to the New York Times. And believe me, I have students that say, I don't want to read about New York. And I'm like, it's not about New York, it's about the friggin' globe. It's about every single country in the world. The New York Times has the greatest resources, and they're the most adversarial, intellectual exploration of important geopolitics ever. Sure, Washington Post is big, sure. John Brier, the Associated Press, covers the globe, sure. But in terms of the quality of writing and what they get, to me, that's the least expensive, biggest bang for the buck. And then we always have that issue of what about the Wall Street Journal? And sure, they do some fine stuff, but if you read The Economist, you can get the same thing quicker, briefer, and better written. But that's just one opinion. That's just one opinion. So I'm just saying, it's one of those things that we have to teach people. And I went through some stuff 2 days ago, and there is a, where's Cheryl? Cheryl's Bauman here. Oh, no, oh, sorry, that's another Cheryl. But yes, Cheryl Bauman, my wife and partner, et cetera, et cetera. She likes to watch the CBS Sunday Morning Show. And CBS Sunday Morning had a piece on the Swiss children, that's right, grammar school children practicing media literacy. They start media literacy in grammar school, like literally 7-year-olds. That's the way to do it. That's the way to be able to tell the little people, like, you know, is this a good story or is this a bad story? Is this story constructed to appeal to your emotions or to appeal to your logic? Is it trying to persuade you? I mean, you really have to get down to that granular level and look at the DNA of any sort of magazine article or anything else. And I say that because I really truly believe that the linear acquisition of knowledge is the best way to go. That is reading. It's all about the reading because everything is based on the word to begin with. So that whole thing about whenever we have the discussion about, yes, Finley Peter Dunn and the role of the newspaper is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, it gets back to Marshall McLuhan and the medium is the message. And reading is just fundamental across the board for the quality of education and for understanding whether something is persuasive with a bias towards a constructive community or persuasive in the sense of just trying to create propaganda and create harm and, you know, basically undermine a society, a civilization, if you will. So that was a lot, but we're done. No, we're not done.
Thank you, Rich. So we heard about news literacy. We learned about how local news is literally part of the community in more ways than one. Information, but also, you know, business relationships. We heard about how informed communities are more engaged, and about how, you know, one of the things that the press does is give voice to the voiceless. Why don't you spend the time that we have left to talk about, like, what are some of the ways forward? Brier has already sort of touched on this, but I know that he knows a lot more. So I want to go back to Brier. Can you talk a little bit about some of the more promising avenues that the media is using to carve out a different future for itself?
Great. Yes, I'll make this quick. Well, I get asked a lot, what can we do to help? What's going on? Brown, subscribe. That's the number one thing. The news industry itself has to evolve. There's plenty of critiques of the media around. We are evolving our business models quickly. We're becoming digital-first businesses. So externally, though, we're in a situation kind of like the music industry was in about 15 or 20 years ago. You know, Napster was out there. Everybody was just used to getting stuff free online. Nobody was paying for music. The industry was collapsing. So it required 3 big changes. One change was convincing the societal change, convincing people that, hey, this is important, it's valuable, you have to pay for it. It also required the industry itself to evolve and to adapt to the way people were consuming music online and things like that. The third thing, it required regulatory change. The government has to decide this is really important, it's a problem, this is a public good, we need to make sure and save it. This is where it gets a little controversial. I'm on the opinion page, by the way, at the Seattle Times, so I have an opinion, I'm biased, and I advocate for this stuff. So there are multiple things that need to be done to ensure the news industry doesn't really collapse over the next 10 or 15 years. In the near term, we need to find out ways to stop the bleeding, to maintain what we've got left before it's too late. At the federal level, we've advocated for Congress to provide tax credits and things like that to preserve newsroom jobs. At the state level, there's a bill right now called Senate Bill 5400. It's a long shot whether it gets done this year or not. But Washington is one of a handful of states that have said, hey, this is super important. We got to find a way to preserve what's left of the newsroom jobs. So this would be a surcharge on tech platforms like search and social media companies. It would raise about $25 million a year, and that would provide grants of maybe $14,000 to $15,000 per journalist at local newsrooms, digital-only outlets, and broadcasters in Washington. I think another policy change that we really need to think about is figuring out a way for news companies to basically survive online. Right now we're getting creamed online, even though that's where most people get their news nowadays. The table is tilted in favor of the big platforms, and I'm not just saying this as a whiny newspaper guy. The Department of Justice, in a case brought by the Trump administration, joined by Washington State, just prevailed against Google. A judge ruled on April 17th that Google is illegally monopolizing the digital advertising marketplace, and that's particularly hurt publishers. What it means is we're not really getting as much as we should. We're not getting paid as much as we should for our news content online. Because the Department of Justice won this case, there's going to be a big settlement probably, or remedies to kind of maybe break up the company. I don't know about that. But the end game for us has to be we have to figure out a way to get fairly compensated for the use of our material online. Until that happens, honestly, the industry is going to continue to go down, 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 down. Basically, there's copyright protection right now that protects digital videos, digital movies, books. All those things have really strong copyright protection in the United States. News has a funny fair use exemption that makes it hard for us to demand payment. So that's another area that Congress and the Copyright Office could work on. I'm not sure that the current administration is enthusiastic about doing this. But we got really close with some of these reforms. There was a bill called the Journalism Competition and Preservation Act that almost passed a couple of years ago. It would have required Google and Facebook to negotiate fair compensation with news outlets. Maybe this Department of Justice case will revitalize that. Other countries have done this. Canada, Australia, France have all passed laws requiring fair compensation for news content. South Africa is working on a proposal right now. There's some Asian countries that are working on this. Scandinavian countries, the UK, they're all working on this. Basically, democracies around the world know that preserving their local news industry is super important for their democracies to stay healthy. So we need to figure out a way to do that in Washington State. We need to figure out a way to do that in the United States. And there's a lot of conversation. I've talked to every member of our delegation about this. Every single one but one, when I did this last year, was very supportive of these proposals. Governor Bob Ferguson, I've talked to him about this repeatedly. He's very supportive of this. And people have lots of concerns about it. I'm happy to talk about that. If you want to learn more or follow what I do, I have a free newsletter that's available, st.news/SaveTheFreePress.
Great, thank you for that. You explained that so well. I just wanted to kind of bring that back to the Olympic Peninsula and what we've been doing in support of House Bill 5400. I know that we at Sound Publishing, we have put our full support behind this bill. We're not 100% sure whether it's going to go through. It's in the Ways and Means Committee right now. And I think that we'll see in the next few days whether it gets out of the committee and makes its way forward. But it would mean a great deal to us locally. Could you imagine what that would do, $13,000, $14,000 toward increasing wages of our local journalists. That would be absolutely incredible. So thanks so much for that update, Brier. I think with that being said, I'd also like to talk about another way forward. And I want to kind of bring it back to a full circle moment with John Brier. So being a new publisher and with my great friend Brown Maloney saying to me, spend some time with John Brier, get to know him, I really took that to heart. And so I spent a lot of time with John before, unfortunately, he passed. And in our final lunch together, we talked about the idea of funding a journalism in the Peninsula Daily News newsroom. And what we thought about was that, and what I really presented to him was, okay, we could set up a fund similar to what other newspapers are doing across America. And we could fund that position in the Peninsula Daily Newsroom. So, unfortunately, with John's passing, of course, he was very excited about it and said, I think that may be an avenue, because we really need to, as much as our newsrooms have been quite literally decimated over the last several years, we really need to increase what our coverage is. And the way forward to do that, along with other things like the House bill, is to have the Olympic Peninsula Journalism Fund. So I'm announcing tonight that we are in the process of establishing this fund. And we are doing it in John Brier's honor. And I'd like to thank Barbara Weiss, John Brier's widow, who I'm sure she's out in the audience tonight, for her support. And this fund will, the money from this fund will essentially fund what we call a community journalist. In other markets, that might be an investigative reporter, or it might be a health care or a health reporter or an educational reporter. But in this market, in a rural market, what we need is a community journalist, somebody that is like a general assignment reporter, but somebody that can cover the civics, cover the county, somebody that is the Jack or Jill or they of all trades. And so I'm excited to announce that we are in the process of setting that up and of establishing that fund. And I'm also very thankful. I would like to touch on the fact that Steve Rader Ginsburg, Field Arts and Events Hall, have very graciously stood beside us, and their board of directors voted just a couple weeks ago to say, hey, Eran, if people want to donate to that fund, we will be your fiscal sponsor while you dot your I's and cross your T's, because we want to ensure that there is a firewall protection between any monies donated and our community journalism reporter. So as we're finalizing that partnership for moving forward, I would really like to thank, again, the board of directors here at Field Arts and Events Hall and their vision for helping us make not only this tonight's event happen, but also in being our fiscal sponsor. So if you would like to donate tonight to the Olympic Peninsula Journalism Fund, to our community journalist, our John Brier community journalist, you can write a check to Field Arts and Events Hall. And then in your line item in the memo, you can say PDN Journalism News Fund and Journalism Reporter Fund. So we'd be happy to accept those donations. I'd also like to thank Field Hall, because Steve Rader Ginsburg did share with us just yesterday morning that for anybody that, donated on their happy places, they arrive for tonight, certainly a percentage of the proceeds are going directly to this fund. And so again, I would like to thank Field Arts and Events Hall for helping us move forward with journalism in our community and for having the site to do that.
Terrific. Yeah. I'm a news guy. That's news, right? So we have a little bit of time for Q&A. So this is how we're going to do it. We have 2 microphones in the audience. Maybe raise your hands where the mics are. I see activity back there. There's one. Okay, gotcha. Okay, they're there. They're both there in the back. So we'll have 2 mics in the audience. We're also taking questions that are posted online. So if you see me looking at my phone, I'm not being distracted. I'm seeing if Steve is sending me stuff. We want to get through as many questions as possible, especially because our time is limited. So please keep your questions short and to the point. Think like 30 seconds.
We may not get to all the questions, but that's why we will be in the lobby and upstairs as well.
Yes, so you can always follow up with us if we don't get to them. And when you ask your question, please give us your name and your hometown. And again, like Brown said, don't worry, we're going to be hanging around for a little while, so you'll be able to get your question. So, do we have any questions from the audience?
Hi, my name is Juan Choi. My hometown is Nashville, Tennessee, but I live here in Port Angeles now. Really appreciate this panel. Thank you very much for all of your insight and your work. My question is about, since you mentioned a hybrid model where it's a for-profit, privately owned newspaper taking on public funds, either through foundations or from taxpayers. My question is about a full publicly funded nonprofit model newspaper. I know there's been several models around the world and in many municipalities in multiple different types of formats that have been very successful. And if this private model is not working anymore, thanks to Google and Craigslist and all sorts of others, I get particularly uncomfortable with public funds going to private ownership, privately owned entities, especially at a time when somebody like Jeff Bezos takes over Washington Post, such a respected newspaper who arbitrarily decides on the content and influences the editorial content. And so I'm curious, and I fully recognize that I'm speaking with people who own newspapers and who work for private newspapers, but what your thoughts are as journalists and people who have worked in the industry on full nonprofit model newspapers.
That's a great question. There's some really interesting models emerging around that right now. In the newspaper world, there's some very high profile, the Salt Lake Tribune was one of the first to do that. That turned nonprofit. The Huntsman family acquired it, turned it over. The Philadelphia Inquirer, really interesting. There was a local telecom magnate that acquired it and then created an endowment. I think it was $20 million initially, and donated it to a nonprofit. And it operates in an interesting way where the nonprofit owns the newspaper. The newspaper operates as a public benefit for profit. But it doesn't really have to, it only has to make like $1 a year. So the profit margin pressure isn't there on that one. In the last few years, there have been a couple of large nonprofits that have emerged to acquire newspaper groups. They've acquired clusters of newspapers in Maine and Georgia and Colorado and operate them as nonprofits. It's great. I mean, more the merrier. As anything to keep them afloat, really, at this point. The only downside to me with the nonprofit model is they cannot have a strong opinion page that endorses political candidates and things like that. If you're going to be a tax-exempt organization, you can't take a position on a political candidate or something like that. Not everybody agrees. I still think that's a good role for newspapers to do, but definitely that is a big part of news going forward. We've long had nonprofit public broadcasters, of course. They're under pressure right now. And we're going to see more and more of these nonprofits. There's a lot happening in the digital space. Altogether there's about 400 or 500 online-only news outlets in the United States, out of which, maybe half or more of those are nonprofit. The downside to that, that's exciting and it's great. The downside is that about 90% of those are in big cities that already have newspapers. They're not really happening in the news deserts and the rural areas and the suburban areas that have lost their local news coverage. Now, that's the trick to figure out with the nonprofit thing. It's cool, it's great, bring it on. The tough thing is that rural areas that really need local news coverage don't tend to have a lot of wealth and resources that can support that kind of thing. So we'll see. There's also a group of philanthropies that got together and raised $500 million plus to address the local journalism crisis a couple of years ago, led by the MacArthur Foundation, the Genius Grant folks. We'll see if that's still not a lot. As I said earlier, there's about 5,500 or so local newspapers, 400 or 500 of digital outlets. So there's a long way to go to backfill what's been lost. We've lost 3,000 local newspapers in the last 20 years. So there's a long way to go until we can fill that gap.
I think too, just to add to that, the Peninsula Daily News has, that we have a legacy in this community, 109 years. Sequim Gazette just celebrated 50 years this past fall, and the Forks Forum is 94 years. And I think that when we look at this from a local perspective, yeah, it's great to have nonprofit entities, and but I think what we're doing here to accommodate this situation that we have in our newsrooms is to create this hybrid model where we are looking to fund a local journalist that has the legacy and the tie back to those people that have made a difference, the people that are sitting here on this stage, and the person who represents our future.
We're getting some terrific questions online, so let me put one of the online questions to the panel, and maybe we can get two last questions here, but let's go for this one. So this one came in, and it's very timely. Many readers perceive bias in reporting, whether ideological or corporate driven. How do you balance editorial decisions to minimize accusations of partisanship while still covering divisive issues? Very relevant.
Well, I think that should be the two that are involved in daily newspapers on a regular basis. Brier, you can, in the big picture, you can speak for the Seattle Times, and Eran, of course, locally.
Yeah, well, it's always a challenge. I get asked that a lot, and I think that's why. I think the reason it's important to preserve professional news organizations is because they have standards to try and minimize bias. If they make mistakes, they correct it. They respond to feedback. And if they have too many problems, they lose the trust of readers, they lose their credibility, and their business goes down. So I guess that's an argument for a for-profit independent news too, is because if we don't do a good job, you lose your customers, there's nothing left. So it's super important to have standards, to have good editorial processes, to have enough of a robust staff and hire professionals to edit their stories and everything else. So nobody's perfect. Every day is a new paper. Sometimes we make mistakes, but if we correct them and address those and continually improve, I think we can address those concerns.
Well, I think of the letters to the editor that we get, or the phone calls on a daily basis. One day it may be that we are too conservative leaning, and the next day, or maybe it is even that afternoon, that we are too liberal leaning. I think what it boils down to is our journalism code of ethics and policy, and that bias does not have a place in our workplace. So I think that's how I'd like to answer that, to say, you know, the people in this room, the journalists, the people here on this stage, you know, truth and integrity, people hear me talk about that a lot, is that, you know, everything else falls below that. And so being a trusted news source in your community is what makes all the difference in the world.
Do we have another question from the audience?
Thank you. Kevin Russell, Joyce. Brown, I'm gonna direct this to you, go to Eran, and end up at Emma. You have a problem. You have a problem that there's a trust issue in journalism. And Brown, I would like to say to you, I have no comfort in this. I find no comfort at all in digital, this. Eran, I'd like to say to you a word that some people don't like, but I'll say this: your paper's a sanctuary. Every day, when I get this, I find my community. And Emma, when I read an article, I don't have to know you wrote it, because I know in how it's written that it becomes truth to me. And I'll go back. In 1989, I was a Los Angeles County Deputy Sheriff, and I was shot. There were 7 major newspapers down there. Not one of them got it right, not one. And I started to distrust the media. Those of you that know me, I've been interviewed, and God bless John Brier. One night at a party, he said to me, "You're the most photographed man in Clallam County." He said, "John, you own the paper. It's your photographers." So, Emma, I want to thank you. Please, don't lose what you have.
Yes, thank you, Emma.
So I think what I'm hearing, Kevin, is you're very much a newsprint person. And so, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. The other thing I think I've heard is if 78 newspapers didn't get it right, you're a damn hard person to please. Make no mistake.
And
I
I'm
think it
going to
would be
hear about
unanimous
it
with that.
if we get it wrong.
But thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
I think we have time for one more. We can fit in one more question.
Robbie, I think. Is it Robbie? Or no? No. Okay.
Hi. Whoops. Hi, folks. I'm Mark Fisher. I'm from Port Angeles. And this is more of a comment, maybe, than a question. I'm a recently retired physician, and I've been concerned about recent few years of the trajectory of fake medicine. You guys have a jump start on us with fake news years prior, which of course I totally disagree with. Mr. Maloney, you mentioned what we can do is subscribe, and I would say the other thing the audience can do is speak with their neighbors about the importance of journalism, about the importance of the North Star of journalism, and do it at a grassroots basis so that we can begin to shift the direction of this aircraft carrier that is taking us down the wrong path. I say that both for your sector in journalism and unfortunately my sector in healthcare.
So thank you for saying that. And the one thing I forgot to mention as far as what you can do is support our advertisers. You hear someone on the radio, please pay attention to that. And that money stays local. Someone that subscribes to the daily news, please support the advertisers. The Port Townsend Leader is represented here. If you live in Jeffco and read the Leader, support their advertisers, please.
I think if I could just add to that a little bit and to leave you with this. There's many people in our community that have made an incredible difference. Among them was John Brier, and we look at Joe Rance and Matt Drake, and even Pearl, who sang at the World Series. There's many people in this community who have made a tremendous difference. There is something in the water here. There's something in the ground that we are eating or drinking, whatever it is, but there's something incredibly special. And I think when I look around and I see the faces in this room, I want us to remember that we are something special and that we can do things in a really extraordinary way. And I think when we talk about what we can do, it's engage with us. Did we get that story right? Do we need to make a change? Follow us on Facebook. 28,000 followers we have now. Digitally subscribe. We have 3,400 digital subscribers. Continue your print subscription. I'd like to just give a little shout out to those who have continued their subscriptions with us through the really tough days of COVID. You are the reason why we continue what we do. So engage and support, and if we're lucky, I invite you to donate.
Is this hot? Yeah. Okay. One quick thing, since Robbie and Jim Mantooth are here, I want to mention too, certainly one of the most generous scholarships, it's not alone, scholarships is the Webster Scholarship, and that's because Charles and Esther Webster, who own the Peninsula Daily News and KONP Radio, basically put in this endowment. And Esther Webster attended Roberta Mantooth's classes and decided to give a huge amount of money. I don't know how much it was at the time. I want to say it was like a $500,000 endowment, which has grown to like 1.9 million. So all those courses that are specific to journalism are called communication studies, by the way. So anyways, they're called communication studies, and therefore that's what it is. But it's incredibly generous. If you look around at community colleges, and even if you look at all the universities, it's amazing how much money is given out on a regular basis. And there's also field trips and other things that are outstanding that are important. And that's a pretty amazing thing, again, for a rural area to have that kind of money dedicated specifically for journalism, and it describes that in the original will. So that's really important. The other thing is, because of grad school work that I did, I spent a lot of time with the Shelton Mason County Journal. I don't know how many people are familiar with that, but I would say, and I hate to create more work for everybody, but it is one of those things with the Daily News or the Squim Gazette or the Forks Forum, but their letters to the editor are utterly amazing at the Shelton Mason County Journal. They run pages and pages, and it's too expensive. But I'm just telling you, they run pages and pages of incredibly thoughtful, reflective
Have
letters.
you checked out the Forks Forum lately?
Yeah, they do, and it's just amazing. So I'm just saying, if people want to write letters to the editor, both on topics that are, and I'm not saying, yeah, of course, we want them to be acutely local, but there are people writing about the Ukraine. There are people talking about the climate crisis. There are people talking about all sorts of things in the Shelton Mason County Journal. And when I was reading this stuff, I was like, really? I can't, and maybe that's simply because of the proximity to Olympia. I'm not sure what it is. There's just a lot of extremely thoughtful, very well done letters to the editor in that paper. And so I had to do some content analysis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was pretty fascinating to see. So I'm just throwing that out there because if people want to write letters to the editor, it's an open forum to do so with obviously editing guardrails that have to go into something like that. So I'm just throwing that out
and
there.
I thought you were going to talk about the fact that we're on the precipice of having another partnership with Peninsula College this year, with having an intern in the PDN newsroom. So that's what Rich and I and PDN executive editor Brian McLean are working on right now.
Well, that's it. We're out of time. If we didn't get to your question, come on up. We'll continue the conversation. And also, want to announce that the kitchen and bar are open upstairs, so we can retire there. And I think that the last thing that I have to say is that I think this wonderful panel and you deserve a round of applause.